You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specialising in content acquisition, strategy, research and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
Hello and welcome to Inside Content. I'm Hayley, a director here at 3Vision, and today I'm speaking with Beth Anderson, General Manager of Fast Channels at BBC Studios. In this episode, we discuss all things fast, including how to leverage your content catalogue, the shift towards newer content, the importance of localisation, as well as digging into how the BBC are increasing ROI, owned and operated channels, and the future of broadcasters entering the fast space. Hi Beth, thank you very much for joining us. We've been looking forward to hearing your insights and expertise on arguably distribution's newest frontier, which is free ad-supported streaming TV. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about my favourite topic.
Perhaps you could start by giving us an overview of your role at BBC Studios and also Studios' strategy in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I am the SVP General Manager of Fast Channels, which is a very cool job title, and VOD sales. So I oversee within that our global strategy for Fast overall, as well as our ongoing support for VOD, it specifically with a focus on ad-supported VOD, AVOD. Within that remit, I have 11 fast channels live in the US, a few peppered as well in Canada and Latin America, and then a further 9 around EMEA, and looking at how we can roll out more territory-specific offerings as the world of fast continues to blossom internationally. So yes, I run quite a large team of marketers, programmers, salespeople, sales operations. It's not for the faint of heart is the world of fast. And luckily, we've been in this space now for 5 years. I said 4 the other day and I realized it's actually 5. So since its inception, which is really, really lovely. And I think the reason why I'm so happy to be in this space is that it started off as a business development venture, and both our platform partners and our content owners within the company have just really gone on a ride with us to kind of learn about the business and learn about the audience and iterate as we go. So we have, for want of a better term, in a 5-year-old business, become industry veterans as a result of this function in this role.
Great. And do you want to give our audiences an indication of the types of channels that you have in the markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I categorize them in 3s. Love a grouping of 3s. So the 3 different types of channels that we run are single series or single IP channels. Those are 24/7 episodes of just one show. And luckily, because we're the BBC, we've been around for 100 years. We have a number of shows that we've been running for a big old portion of that 100 years. The leaders in that space for us are Antiques Roadshow UK. We call it UK because there is actually a US format as well that is very, very familiar to our American audiences. But the UK format might not necessarily be as familiar. And so there's a really lovely point of difference and point of comfort with that channel. We have Top Gear. Unsurprisingly, one of our most successful channels really appeals to both people who love cars, but also people who love fun and playground antics and grown-ups pretending to be kids and doing crazy things with cars and getting really passionate about subjects that they care about. And then we have classic Doctor Who, which just is dedicated to our 1963 to 1989 episodes of Doctor Who, which will be very familiar to your British audiences, but something that continues to delight and surprise audiences, especially in the US. And then there are some other fun offerings in the soap opera space. We have a Doctor's channel, and we have a quiz show called Impossible that just airs that show and nothing else. Really, really fun and allows for long-term engagement. The second group of channels that we have are our BBC branded offerings. Those tend to be more genre focused, more broad in scope, and they could go from shows that are a little bit older to things that aired in the last couple of years. So we have our BBC Food channel, very self-explanatory, which I'll explain a little bit about our self-explanatory sales strategy in a bit, I'm sure. And then we have a BBC Home and Garden channel as well. Interestingly, that started off as a BBC Home channel, and we expanded it to BBC Home and Garden when we realised that our audience was responsive to a gardening offering, and it sat well with the type of programming that we were doing on that channel already. And then we have a BBC Kids offering in both English and Spanish available. And then our third group of bucket of channels, it's really just one right now, which is our support for our direct-to-consumer ventures elsewhere in the market. So we have a BritBox Mysteries channel, which celebrates our BritBox brand, our niche SVOD service, and specifically points to the crime dramas that you will see on that. So it's partly a try before you buy, it's partly kind of brand awareness building. But what's most interesting about that channel is that we're not necessarily seeing any cannibalization between people choosing fast over choosing an SVOD experience. It's really about meeting an audience where they are and allowing them to celebrate some of our crime drama channels and see what the life of BritBox is like, really.
So that's a fantastic mix of channels kind of across single IP, single genre, and then multi-genre there with kids. We've heard that single IP often perform very well, but I could see how that can start to change over time. Are there any learnings? You said you've been in this business nearly 5 years now, about the types of channels that perform well, or is it a really case of varies by platform, territory?
I think the reason why single IP channels continue to perform well is down to the humans who schedule it. I think the danger with a single IP channel is if you algorithmically program it, or you do what we call in the industry zombie channel it, and you have the same episodes airing on a really, really frequent basis. You can air the same episode multiple times on a single series IP channel. So you don't have to have an infinite supply of new content for a channel. I mean, you heard me talk about the classic Doctor Who channel there. There literally cannot be any more of that. That is a finite number of episodes in a finite group of years. But being able to find reasons to celebrate different content at different times by putting really smart and passionate people behind it, as I'm lucky to have over at BBC, and I know a lot of our industry partners also have, that scheduling expertise really allows for an ebb and flow of channel performance to avoid what we call the kind of the dip, where you might have a single IP channel perform really, really well for the first couple of months, and then people kind of feel like they've consumed it and then it'll disappear off. We've had really consistent performance for up to 5 years on some of these channels, and that I do put entirely down to the type of marathoning, the type of data analysis that we do, the type of listening and iteration, maybe even on different platforms, and recognize that we have different audiences coming in different mood states on different platforms. So we're allowing a different celebration to be the case. So with our classic Doctor Who channel, for example, there's so much that we can uncover with Doctor Who in general, because it has got such a rich IP behind it of characters, of places, and even of actors. We can do things like, celebrating birthdays or anniversaries of specific episodes, but also, draw parallels to the time of year or certain seasonality that is very prevalent that can also kind of link in with our other channel strategies. So it's really about staying present and not taking it for granted that you just have one piece of IP. It's really like a think inside the box strategy. Yes, you have parameters. You're looking at just one type of show, but there's so much play that you can do within that. And it's about bringing that curiosity and strength of mind in the scheduling process.
That's really interesting, because I was always sort of concerned that with single IP, it may be a case that you run out and you can't do that many repeats for so long, but your clever scheduling clearly is the answer to that.
Well, right. And we did have a really nice example of some A/B testing there, right? So we have classic Doctor Who on one hand, finite number of episodes, and we have Antiques Roadshow, which is currently airing show. So we're able to see, which one performs better. And of course, there is a wonderful thing about having new content. I'm always appreciative of having an investment in continuing treasured IP like Antiques Roadshow. But we are able to see both channels perform well, and we don't templatized too much. So the strategy that we take on Classic Doctor Who isn't the same as Antiques Roadshow. To your point, it does change dependent on the type of IP that you have and the type of programming that you're looking at. But if you do have new programming, obviously we celebrate that, and that's something that we definitely enjoy. But there is a way of creating a really long life cycle. And I think the reason why that exists, why that concept exists, and why you have such high repeatability is because we've lived in a world where an audience has been introduced to binging for almost 2 decades at this point. It was prevalent in DVD, where people would buy DVD box sets. And then, of course, in the wonderful world of SVOD, we've really introduced marathoning, and audiences really enjoy the comfort and familiarity of watching something that they already know. I know if I'm, feeling under the weather, I might go back to something that I've watched multiple times before because it's relaxing for my brain. And I think we see that a lot with fast audiences, is there isn't that same fear of repeatability or tiredness that you might have seen in a traditional TV linear space in the pay TV world.
Fast initially has been quite synonymous with older titles. We hear lots of discussion in the industry about Fast enables archive content to be resurfaced, and looking at some of the channel content, arguably it is heavily weighted towards catalogue. But we're seeing some examples of newer content coming through. When do you think there's going to be a shift in that trend?
Oh, I think it's happening right now. And we certainly are doing it. It really depends on the type of channel. And, it's funny, the catalogue piece is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It became a synonymous term with fast. Fast is catalogue and catalogue is fast. And I absolutely appreciate that. And it's wonderful. There's lots of reasons to be just full of delight that we can find an outlet for some of our shows that have never met a certain audience and bring audience and content together in weird and wonderful ways. But it was also because it was a business development initiative to begin with in the industry at large. And so the industry at large wouldn't have put new shows in a format that was untested for returns. So, the majority of this business is performance-based in terms of the economics behind it. So that would have been a very, very big bet early on. As a result, the majority of the programming was catalogue in nature for pure business economics. And as the business has grown in both revenue awareness, but also in reach awareness, you're starting to see companies becoming a lot more bullish in the type of programming that they're putting out there. And, we're lucky in a sense, especially in the US, because we have more content than we have channel partners and channel interests. So we do have the ability on, say, food and home to air shows that have never had a platform in the States before. So we're already doing it, we're already kind of premiering in that space. And I think that that's really leaning into to a world in which we can recreate among especially younger audiences who aren't part of the cable universe and the pay TV space. And now, you're looking at about half of the US population that doesn't have access to pay TV at all, to recreate that water cooler moment, that ability to celebrate a show that you otherwise wouldn't find. And of course, we have that in the SVOD space already, but I think there is an immediacy and an access inside the fast space that allows for new programming to be discovered and a lot of people to find it both in their own time and at the same time.
Just like to talk about localization for a bit. And you mentioned earlier that I think you have your kids channel now distributed in Spanish, which is fantastic. When we speak to various distributors and platforms that are working in Fast, especially those in non-English speaking markets, there seems to be a trend that it's becoming more and more important that content is localized and that subs doesn't necessarily work in certain markets. Again, does the BBC have access to plenty of localized content to be able to fulfill some of those platform requirements, or is it simply that the return on the investment to do that, to localize some of those shows, just wouldn't be where you need it to be at the moment?
I wish I had a plethora of localized assets and, we definitely don't have enough, and I don't think the industry has enough overall. I think it's particularly interesting when you look, as we have done, inside an English speaking market that does not have English as its only language in the US, to see where we can serve the audience. And in terms of return on investment, it's such an interesting question, because yes, of course, we always have to balance our books and look at the economics, but I celebrate FAST as the most equitable form of media in a generation. I've said it a couple of times, but I really do believe that we're increasing access to programming to audiences that otherwise have not had access before. We've had a very elite form of media with various different paywalls in the past, and here we have something that is immediate and free, that does create access for minority audiences, or audiences that have felt like they have been marginalized in the past. And I think, that's why we've been so keen to celebrate Spanish language programming when we do have it, but we certainly don't have enough. And it is a challenge, because we don't want to create assets that aren't suitable. We don't want to do it in a way that is cost effective to the detriment of quality. And so it is about finding and listening and seeing where we can play in the space in a way that is economically efficient, but also ultimately meets the language interests. I would also say, so we've got our BBC Kids channel in Spanish, and I forgot to mention that we also have a Top Gear in Spanish as well. One language isn't always just one language. We have neutral Spanish for Latin America, and we have Castilian Spanish in European Spain. So it is always a challenge to kind of find where the right play is and make sure that we're meeting the needs of our audience. The other thing I think is, we're not looking inside one country where multiple languages do exist, and it's not just Spanish that exists in the US, there are multiple. If you do look at something where that language is the majority language, so say German in Germany, it is imperative that you use German assets, of course, and we do. And so we have, multiple channels in Germany that are in German. We are using assets that already exist, and we're not yet at the point of being able to, commission. But I think we're really paying attention to how each different market responds to the world of FAST. And each market in each language has a different cultural heritage in the TV space. So how FAST manifests isn't going to be the same way that it's manifested in the US. And we're kind of looking at the market to see where we can make those investments before we, go fully into the space of localizing everything. It's also, like I mentioned, we have 100 years of programming. So a little bit of focus on where we should put our investment is necessary. And so we're looking at, where the natural interests are arising out of our existing catalogue of assets before investing fully. But I wish we had more than we have, for sure.
Well, it'll be an interesting opportunity then to talk about platforms and how they're differentiating themselves. I mean, we're seeing, an increasing number pop up from across the industry, whether it's kind of those owned by the big media conglomerates, kind of independent third party, those run by the OEMs. How are platforms differentiating themselves, Beth, and how can you take advantage of some of that? So things like exclusivities, newer premium content, what things are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we are absolutely seeing differentiation among the platforms. It's interesting because it's not necessarily deliberate. It's partly the result of the buying experience of the device. It's partly due to the watching experience in the household. The majority of FAST, as we believe it to be, because actually, the real secret about the FAST world is that we don't have enough data to necessarily prove exactly where people are watching, but we believe people are watching in the living room predominantly. Suggests that there is opportunity for co-viewing versus single viewer. And you do see different viewer behaviors as a result of that different experience. You might see a slightly truncated watch time in a co-viewing household if you have multiple generations watching at the same time, versus a single viewer that might, start off in a FAST environment and then ping off into an AVOD space or an SVOD space to watch for longer periods of time. So within that, there are a few different types of FAST operator. We have our OEMs, the folk like Samsung and LG and Vizio. super interesting models that they have there, because there's a lazy metric that you kind of lose 50% of your viewers every single time you ask them to click on something. The OEMs, you turn on the TV and the first thing you see is that environment, is that fast environment, that EPG. It's so immediate. So they have huge reach. And I think that they are a very interesting mass play as a result. I think they're a really interesting co-viewing experience as a result. And we might program things slightly differently for those players as a consequence of that viewer experience. It's a very, very rich reach play in there. Something that is more app-based in nature, but ubiquitous across devices. There's a certain brand loyalty in there. So you have Pluto, for example, in that space, or Plex, where people gravitate toward that app versus any other experience inside the native device in which they're operating. And so there you have slightly more, I'd say, fan-based viewership, by channels like Classic Doctor Who do really, really well, where you can really do a deep dive into a subject matter. Single IPs work very well as a result of that. But then you also have a broad spectrum of channels that you can play within. And we really, we're very happy and proud working with Pluto on how they schedule their overall service and being sympathetic to their overall look and feel. So we're part of a Pluto interface as a result of that, and our programming is part of a broader conversation. So we think of our programming slightly differently there, and you might see some of our shows appearing on some of Pluto's owned and operated channels as a result. We're part of a bigger conversation. So our channel strategy is linked in with our content distribution strategy there. And then the kind of third bucket there is people who own a device, so the likes of Roku, for example. The Roku channel, super interesting, very, very sticky. Also, very accessible UI for multiple generations. So I think you're seeing maybe a group of different ages come into that, very young to more mature audiences, really finding a home inside the Roku channel, and Amazon Freevee as well inside the Fire TV environment. Very, very accessible. If you are coming through a dongle or through a device, over the top device, you will be greeted with that in a very friendly manner, and you will have a different viewer as a result. Now, the reality is we don't get that demographic information from most of our parties, because most of these parties don't have a login screen. Some do, but most don't. So honestly, they don't know what age the audience is and what gender the audience is. So what we're doing is looking at the business slightly differently and recognizing, we live in a time of gender fluidity and age fluidity. I don't necessarily consider myself either old, young, or in between. I just consider myself passionate about different subjects, and I'm subject to different moods at different times of day. So we do look at the business as a mood state. We live in a world where there is so much content out there, and the audience is inundated by choice. And sometimes as content programmers, content owners, we sort of feel a little bit like we're looking through a fogged window and an audience saying, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do next? We're here, we're ready. What do you want to do? And it's a lot of pressure on our audience. So I think that the fast model of just having something playing that is editorially scheduled by someone who's really passionate about a subject, it's quite high appeal to an audience member who might be tired, a bit exhausted, doesn't want to choose, and just wants to relax into an environment. It's why you have a lot of comfort viewing television programming inside this model in general. And so we do try and meet the mood of our audience, and regardless of, which demographic they fit into, find something that is enjoyable and accessible and not too demanding to watch. And so we create schedules that kind of flow very easily, and don't provide too much kind of disruption as a result. So it is definitely something that is organic and iterative. We definitely are seeing differences. And when you speak about exclusivity early on there, I think exclusivity is one word. I think customization is another. We're really interested in super serving a platform that we're working with and programming to where we're seeing natural instincts happen inside that user base, inside that viewership, and also inside that advertiser viewership as well. So where we have an advertiser partner inside a platform versus another one, we might want to program sympathetically to that type of advertiser versus another service that might have a slightly more, a bigger sense of immediacy or more action and a slightly more slow pace on another service. So I think we're going to start to see more iteration happening across the platforms, not just from the kind of bullish nature of business development where you tend to find people wanting to do exclusivity, but also from that more rolling hills organic sense of, okay, well, we are appealing to a different audience there than we are on this other platform, and so we will program separately. And so that's what we're really looking to do right now, is really listen to the audiences on these different platforms and see where there is natural opportunity for exclusivity and also natural opportunity for customization.
You mentioned some of the strengths of the OEMs being the fact that they control the user interface, right? And I was going to ask about owned and operated channels, because we've seen the number significantly rise. And, in particular, the OEMs like Samsung, Vizio, LG, they're looking to grow their advertising revenues and generate good margins for a TV business where in hardware terms has very low margins, so makes sense. And we've seen the number of these partnerships grow. And I was going to ask about BBC Studios and having that balance between being a channel distributor on that platform versus a content licenser to those channels. Is there a strategy there? It sounds like you're doing both.
Yeah, we are. And again, it's because we are so rich in content. We have the ability to help the whole business grow. We're going through a change management process. I think we're trying to create a welcome mat for a lot of audiences to feel like this is for them, and not every audience member is the same. So we recognize that we want to put our programming where it's going to be enjoyed best. And sometimes that's in something that we fully control, and sometimes that's in something that we don't. It's not actually that different than the traditional TV space, where we would have had a channel that we fully own, and then we would also put content regularly on other people's channels. A lot of people don't know necessarily that they're watching a BBC show, but that would appear on HBO or on Discovery or on PBS. But we would regularly put programming in that space. And I don't really think Fast is that different. I think really we want to be where the content fits best. And also it doesn't have to be just in one place. I think, we're, like I mentioned with the O&O strategy on multiple platforms, we've got programming airing on the Ride or Drive channel on Samsung, for example. Our Top Gear programming exists there, and it exists on our Top Gear channel, which is carried by Samsung. So it's an opportunity for people to discover the show and then go, wait, there's a whole channel dedicated to this? That's fantastic. I'll go watch it. So it flows both ways. It's really a symbiotic relationship. And I'm most interested in making sure that our content is accessible and relevant to the audience where they already are. This is the latest form of distribution in a very, very long line of distribution strategies that have existed and developed in the business. And I think really we're not in the market to close off our content, especially, when I was speaking earlier about how important it is to make sure our programming is accessible to people who have felt marginalized in the past. We want to be relevant to them, and we want to put our programming where they want to be. So we are really embracing that. And I think, we're also embracing that with people who are not even channel operators themselves, or platform operators themselves. So they run a channel across a group of different channels. You'll see right now on Fuse Beats, for example, our Luther show is airing. So we will include essentially the same thing that we have done in the past of TV sales. We'll make our programming available where it will perform best, where it will be appreciated and cherished the best. And so, yeah, we're really open to finding the right path forward. But really, it's important to us to also make sure that we are controlling channels at the same time. So as long as we are in the space, working with the platforms on our own channel initiatives, we're very, very supportive of also putting our programming on others as well.
I enjoyed your term of welcome map.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's like with maybe a little pot plant out there, and we're ready with a cup of tea and a comfy sofa. Just say, it's okay, come in. This is for you. It is
great
for you.
It's great. The end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 saw many broadcasters add fast to their digital catch-up services, ITVX, TF1, and there are a few others on the horizon as well, and many more. How do you think this space is going to play out? Do you think it's going to become a standard part of broadcasters' digital offerings that they have a fast offering?
I mean, look, you got a business in the US alone that's about $250 billion a year of advertising revenue. And in the US particularly, you have a world in which traditional pay TV doesn't have the same monopoly that it once did. And so those ad dollars are there. And finding the right home for them is going to be a dispersed form of iteration. It's going to go across a lot of different media types, a lot of different players, some of them more direct, some of them indirect. You mentioned ITVX and TF1. You also have Netflix, right, who introduced an advertising tier, and Hulu has always had an advertising tier and since their 2009 2010 situation. So it's not unusual to have advertising inside a predominantly pay TV environment or a paid environment, or just an environment which is not non-traditional, not necessarily ad first. What I think is more interesting is that you will see the fast business be adapted and adopted in a different way in each market. The UK is fascinating. It is a free space. It has different challenges. And I think that fast in the US is an answer to a call that was presented inside the US media system. It was very specific to the US. It can't just be lifted and shifted and immediately appeal to a UK audience or an Australian audience or anywhere around Europe. It's going to be appreciated in a different way in each market. In the US, there was a predominantly paid environment that was becoming a smaller and smaller access pool for the majority of Americans. And fast is an additional tool inside a massive media landscape that provides a lot of different access points for audiences that traditionally has had some form of pay environment as a first window. And here we have an opportunity for the first window to also be free. Of course, in the UK, it's always been free. And so it makes total sense to me that you have players in the UK market having a free ad-supported tier as part of their overall offering, because that's part of the national dialogue. That's part of the expectation. And so you will see, I just think that the most dangerous thing we can do is put fast inside a box and say, this is TV, this is all it's going to be. What you've seen in the US is what you're going to see in every single market. And I'm just really fascinated to see how different operators in each market, especially the kind of leaders of editorial voice in each market, adopt and adapt fast into their strategy. I mean, overall, of course, it's a revenue play. Of course it is. There's a wonderful way to create a diverse portfolio of commercial gains by having advertising alongside some form of paid environment too. But predominantly, the real rich piece in this is the reach. And so finding the way to answer the call of an audience member saying, you are throwing so many different TV options at me, I am paralyzed and I cannot choose what to watch. Please tell me what to watch and make it something that is accessible for me so I don't have to think sometimes. And then I will think and make decisions at other times when I have the capacity to do so. And I will be in a mood to sit down and watch something very cerebral, and I will want to make that decision and I will want to have that control. But please also give me an option where I don't necessarily have that control because I am inundated. I'm living in a content saturated environment and it's too much.
So for broadcasters, it's a natural extension of their game, right?
Absolutely. I think it's another way of saying, okay, this is the way that you would like it. Yeah, I will embrace this and find a way forth. I don't see it stopping. I think it's going to be different in every market. But I think it behooves every broadcaster to kind of think about how this form of media, how the linear part of pay linear can be adopted into existing thriving business models.
Well, I would love to end this episode with getting your thoughts on how the fast landscape will evolve, because at the moment it's crazy. There's so many channels. There's a lot of very weak offerings. are we likely to see consolidation as the weaker ones fall aside and those of kind of a higher broadcast quality rise to the top?
I think it's inevitable. I think that we're also in the infancy of technology for this business. At the minute, it's quite a passive experience, and that plays to its favor. But especially on the advertising side of things, I think that we're still at a point of essentially having advertising be a tax that you pay for watching something. And it's fine. It's very honest, and the audience is aware of it and saying, I know I'm aware I'm not paying for this, and so therefore I will receive an ad. It's very honest form of exchange. But I think that that's step one of something that can be a lot richer and a lot more seamless. Always, of course, recognizing when you're watching an ad versus when you're watching a show, very important. But having something that we can build in a level of interactivity. Most people who are watching, as I mentioned, are in the living room. Even when they're not, they're on a device. There is a form of interaction, whether it be through a remote control or a phone or another form of device that would allow for fun interplay between an advertiser and a viewer. So I think that that's a really interesting thing that will probably allow for a bit more content focus, because that's not going to work for every single platform channel out there, but it will work for quite a few. So you might see a greater focus on content channels that benefit from having some level of interactivity. You know, I'm not just saying this because I run a quiz channel, and having some form of quiz interface whilst you're on a break is a great idea. That's of course a natural example of where you can have interactivity that plays inside the kind of mood of a channel. But I think outside of that, you know, there's a lot more interaction that will play there that will create a little bit more consolidation. And of course, you know, a lot of people are trying this right now. But advertising is really hard, and programming is really hard. And there's a huge infrastructure behind me. I get to be the front voice of what is a massive machine that's going into thinking about this and looking at the data and really thinking about where the programming will come from. And not everyone has the luxury of that. And the investment in that, we've really invested in making this work, and we've really invested in finding a place and a platform for our content to be appreciated in lots of different ways. But you will see a natural sunset of players that can't necessarily dedicate that much time and energy into this. So it will become a more refined medium over time, both in content, in advertising play, and probably in platform as well, where you might see a little bit of consolidation. And, you know, as it has been, there has been a number of services that have benefited from other services sort of doing the back end for them, doing the operations for them. And you might see some sort of white labeling come into play with real fast experts interplaying with a device. And so the device will look like the device, and it will have the device branding, but maybe one of the existing platform operators will be fueling that behind that. So I think we'll continue to see that happen. And, you know, it's 5 years in, so it's both a baby and also a baby with some really good lessons that it's learning all the time. So I think that, you know, you will continue to see different investments being made by different platforms, and you will see a level of reduction in channels. Having said that, technically in an interaction form, I think there could be a really lovely world in which we have personalization. So if you like one type of channel, maybe you'll be served other channels that are like that. That's a model that's worked really, really well in the SVOD space. You've just finished the show. Do you want to try this one? You've just been watching this channel. Do you want to try this one? I think that level of personalization actually reopens the idea of having multiple different channels. And already today, I think in the US alone, there's close to 1,500 channels, but not all of them are on every service. And you will see different platforms wanting to focus on different levels of channels as a result. So I think that my hope is that there will be a refining on a platform basis, but a still open door for channel iteration to exist as an industry.
Well, this has been Absolutely fantastic, Beth. Thank you very much. You provided us with a wealth of insights, and I look forward to catching up maybe in 1 or 2 years' time to see if some of your hopes and predictions have been rolled out.
Yeah, well, I can either come back and gloat, or I can come back and apologize for my my misdemeanors. But either way, I'm so grateful for being able to have the chance to talk to you about this. It's a really, really vibrant environment, and I love leaning into opportunities like this to talk about it. So thank you so much for inviting me to take part.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.